Hello Year 11, this is your third and final lesson where we've been working our way through the Language Paper 1 reading paper. So our knowledge goal remains the same. We are going to be, again, very quickly reminding you of the structure, the timings of the exam, but we're going to be focusing today on question 5, which tends to be the trickiest because it's slightly different. Again, remember you have 1 hour to complete this paper if you were going to do it from start to finish in one go rather than in 3 sections like we've been doing this week. You'll be asked to write about 1 extract from a piece of fiction from any point in the 20th century. There are 5 questions and each question asks you to chronologically through the extract. You should spend 15 minutes on question 1 and 2, 15 on 3, 15 on 4, and then finally 15 minutes on question 5. Now, question 5 is a little bit different from questions 2 to 4, as it is evaluative. Now, we know from the work we've done in class that in the sense of the language paper, an evaluative question is requiring you to give your opinion on a statement. So you will be given in the question a statement about the extract, and you need to use evidence from the extract to state whether you agree or disagree with the statement. You may be asked to write about the final little section of the extract as well as the extract as a whole, or you may be asked to just write about the extract as a whole, but you are always expected to write about the whole extract for question 5, which you would have systematically been reading and analysing as you've answered questions 1 to 4. As with the previous 2 questions, it is worth 10 marks, so we should aim for at least 5 mini PE sentences, 4 maybe if you're trying to sort of get that grade 4, but 5 puts you in a far safer position. For those of you that are aiming for 7 and above, again, you want to try to be aiming for 7 to 8 mini PEs or sentences. As always, it's very important to read the question and the statement carefully to make sure that the quotations that you are picking out are appropriate. So this has managed to work so far. So I'm now going to switch over to the visualizer and we will look at the final question of the model paper that I've been doing. So to answer this question, you must consider the passage as a whole. And we can see that it does tell you very explicitly for each question what bit of the extract you're writing about. So I've already got to the end of the passage in question 4. So for this paper, I'm just writing about the passage as a whole, rather than having to make sure I write about the end as well as the passage as a whole. So here's my statement. The writer shows that life for immigrants, such as the Hamiltons, was very hard. How far do you agree? So this is the statement. Do I agree or disagree that in this extract, the life of Samuel and Liza, the immigrants to America from Ireland, is their life presented as hard? It then gives you in the bullet points, you should write about your thoughts and feelings. So again, this is how we know it's evaluative, about the life of the how, so language. The life of the Hamiltons is presented in the passage as a whole, how the writer has created these thoughts and feelings. So we're being reminded there. What do you think and feel about how the life of the Hamiltons is presented? How is it presented as very hard? And again, how does the writer use language to show this to you? That is our focus. Now, to sort of move the lesson along a bit, because I'm aware that you've already sort of listened to me read this whole thing anyway, I've just gone back over it. I've done it in a different coloured highlighter. I would always recommend you bringing into any exam or assessment at least a highlighter, but ideally several different colours. Because what I've done here is I've read back through the extract. I've only had to skim read it, read it very quickly because I have already read it. So I didn't need to read it all in detail again. And what I've done in a different coloured highlighter is I have selected evidence that shows that their life is hard, because I do. My overview is that I do agree with this statement. Their life is presented as hard. And predominantly a lot of my evidence comes from this extract here, and the land that they are forced to farm and attempt to live on as immigrants. They do not get the land of the luckier men that has more water on. And, the fact that the native people tend to take advantage of Samuel's good nature as well, gives me enough evidence to think that, no, I do agree that their life is presented as hard. So obviously it depends on whether you are having to write about the end of the extract as well as the extract as a whole, which you are in the practice one that you've been doing at home. You are expected to write about the final 20 lines and the extract as a whole. And at the end of this video, when I've done my model, I'm just going to go through that question for you a little bit. But it is important to, skim read back through the extract as a whole and make sure that you have selected your quotations, not just from the end, if you're asked to write about it, that you're also writing about the rest of the extract as well. So as always, once I've selected my quotes, I need to very quickly think, well, okay, what are the 5 or 7 or 8 or however many I'm planning to write? What are the quotations that I'm going to use? Well, I think the fact that all the good land was taken is a good one. Again, almost this implication that they're second-class citizens. I've then got this idea of the barren hills and that the land was harsh and dry, so that grass doesn't even struggle to exist. I'm going to sort of do those lines together, I think. I'm going to talk about how the land at the bottom of the valley is described as rich, and this idea that those men are described as luckier. I'm going to talk about this whole idea of the people taking advantage of Samuel. And again, this whole idea that Sam has been forced into, the position to actually deliver his own children. And it's actually, he's incredibly lucky that, through a fully unmedicated natural birth of multiple children, him and his wife haven't lost not only Lisa herself, because childbirth was something that could be very dangerous before medical intervention, but the fact that he's had all these children and has managed to deliver them. Even, this child, if Samuel wasn't such a quick thinker and intelligent, this child who was born with an obstruction, that baby probably would have died. So that's showing that they're unlucky. And again, because of where they live. So they're the 5 that I'm going to focus on. So once you have decided that, and remember, you have to decide that a little bit quicker, I would then write it. Now, I would always say for question 5, it is good to start with a brief overview, just simply stating whether you agree or disagree with the statement. Normally, the right answer, or the answer that is the most obvious, is the fact that you agree with the statement generally. So I'm going to say something like, I agree with the statement because the Hamiltons' life is presented as very hard because of the difficult land they have to farm and the fact the people take advantage of Samuel. Now, if you are somebody who really struggles with coverage and getting 5 done in the time, then it may be you don't want to spend the time doing an overview, but generally the examiners do like an overview. They do like this idea of you showing at the start of your answer, that you have that sort of overview of your of an understanding of the whole extract, which is what this does. So I'm then going to go to my first mini PE, back to my good old when we are told. All the good land was taken. It shows their life is hard because the native people have taken the most fertile land. Fertile just means good for growing, essentially. So there's my first one. When we are told the land was barren, harsh, and dry, it suggests their life is hard because it is very difficult to farm their land and grow crops. Which again, no popping down to Jemson's or Tesco's in those days. If you couldn't farm it or buy it, then you didn't eat. When we are told the land nearby was owned by luckier men, it shows their life is hard because the native people are luckier than the Hamiltons, probably because they were born there, so have an advantage. Now I've had to write a little bit more here because as I was writing it, I suddenly felt like I was in danger of repeating my first point. So whilst it's a different quote, in hindsight, I could have possibly picked a slightly better one because you want to try to avoid making the same point over and over again. Now, I would then move on to my next two quotes. I don't think you guys need to see me do that. So obviously in the 15 minutes I've got, I would write about as much of the extract as I could. Now, in many ways, this was quite a straightforward question 5 because I only had to write about the whole extract. I'd already got to the end of the passage. So because your question 5 is a little bit trickier, I just wanted to spend the last little bit of the lesson before I instruct you to do question 5 yourself, to look at the paper you have been working on. So you should have by now, if you followed the previous 2 lessons, have done questions 1 and 2 on Wednesday. On Thursday, you should have done 3 and 4. And that leaves us now with question 5. So in the last, this says read lines 50 to the end. So you do have to read that last little chunk. In the last 20 or so lines of this passage, Patricia becomes a real heroine. How far do you agree with this statement? You should write about your own thoughts and feelings, about how Patricia is presented here, and in the passage as the whole, how the writer has created these thoughts and feelings. So again, how you're expected to explain how the writer has used language. Now, very quickly, a heroine is simply a female hero. Every time we do this as a mock, there are always a few people that ask, what is a heroine? A heroine is simply the word when you're describing a hero that is female. You'd think it's sort of silly that we have to have different words for hero for male and female, but you know, that's the world we live in, unfortunately. So the statement is, in the last 20 or so lines, Patricia becomes a heroine. How far do you agree? Now, the reason why this question is a little bit tricksy is because you could argue Patricia behaves in a heroic fashion before the last 20 lines. I think, you know, it would be hard to argue against the fact that the fact in the last 20 lines she essentially saves her sister from burning to death, that she is a hero or a heroine. But if you actually look beyond, you know, this is your last 20 or so lines here, really. You could argue that her behaviour from the start of the fire, the fact that she comes in and wakes up her sister, that she was a heroine from the start of the fire. And what's interesting is that Patricia isn't really described as heroic before the fire. The only real mention we get of Patricia, our first impression, is that she's in her room reading also as usual. So Patricia isn't necessarily presented at the start as the sort of person that would be your typical hero. The stereotype of people that sit in their room and read books tends to be people that are a little bit shy or maybe less confident. But the minute the fire starts, you could argue, I would argue, that she is a hero. So in fact, in an overview, I would write about, you know, I actually disagree with this statement because I believe that Patricia becomes a heroine immediately when the fire starts, not just in the 20 or so lines. So you're agreeing with this idea that she is a heroine, but actually it's not just in the last 20 lines. It's actually, you know, right the way back when she wakes up her sister, who could have, you know, continued sleeping and died from smoke inhalation and eventually, you know, died in the fire. So you could argue that, you know, there's lots of evidence, you know, her pulling back the covers, the way she's waking Patricia up, you know, the way she essentially makes their way to the bedroom door, the fact that she pulls off the covers of the bed, stuffing them underneath the door. That's really quick thinking. That's stopping the smoke from going in, you know, finding the blouses, wrapping them around her faces. The fact that, you know, Ruby is hysterical, but Patricia's practical. She smashes the nightlight. You know, Patricia really paid attention at Girl Guides. Now, that's interesting because it implies that she potentially always had this knowledge and this heroism in her. And then, of course, you have this idea of, you know, Patricia actually helping, you know, going to try and save the pets, and then eventually is responsible of the fact that, you know, Ruby gets saved. So I would write in an overview that whilst I agree that she is a heroine, I disagree that she's only a heroine in the last 20 or so lines, as I believe she's presented as a heroine immediately from when the fire starts. And then you'd want to use your evidence from where you believe she is first presented as a heroine and then track your way through to the end. So I would either start with a quotation saying, before the fire, she's not presented as your typical heroine because we're only told she likes to sit in her room and read. But I would say, however, from line 35, you know, and I'd start my quotations from around here, she is presented as a heroine. And, you know, there should be plenty of evidence for that. But apart from, you know, trying to write that brief overview, you are essentially picking your quotations and just continuing to chronologically write your mini PEEs. Now, you should have, by the end of today's lesson, have a full answer to this paper. what I would like you to do, please, is submit this whole paper to your normal class teacher. So only send it directly to me if I teach you. If you have Miss Street, Mr. Thomas, Mrs. Norris or Mr. Downs, please send your paper to them. Now, for those of you that are accessing or have access to Office 365, your school email account, and have been accessing the work via your class Teams page, there is a really nifty way that if you click on the assignment, you can actually submit the work. I'm not 100% how you do that because I don't see the same thing as you on Teams, but I do know that some of my students have been doing that. Now, if you're able to submit it on the Teams group in the assignment for today, that is ideal because actually the way you can get feedback on that is nice and straightforward. However, if you just want to email it directly to your class teacher via email, that is fine as well. I am going to be doing a little tutorial that I will film to try and make sure everyone knows how to access Teams and the assignments and to set it and to submit work that way, because it will be for your teachers a lot more straightforward for us to work out who is and is not setting work, and also be able to give you feedback in a slightly more organised way. But I appreciate that there may be some of you that cannot access your Office 365, maybe you've forgotten your password or just don't know how to do it. If you cannot access your Office 365, need your password sent to you, etc., do please again email your class teacher and we'll do our best to help you, because as we know, this is a situation that we're going to be dealing with, you know, for the next or 6 weeks of all of this term. So the sooner we can get some good structures for submitting work in, the better. So once you've completed question 5, please submit it to your class teacher. We will mark it for you, give you some feedback and give you a grade for that paper. So that is it. Good luck, and I will see you next week.